Welcome to Resiliency Redefined. I'm your host, Robyne, and I am thrilled to share with you information about resiliency, well-being, performance, education, business, parenting, and everything in between. I'm committed to joining you each week to talk about these big ideas and bring them into action, habits, tools, strategies, tactics that allow us to finally uncover what it takes to truly be well. And I'm just so excited that you're here. Today, we're going to be talking about all things perspective. So my work on everyday resiliency identifies that there's 5 key pillars. So the first is belonging, perspective, acceptance, hope, and humor. So one of the things I learned really early when I was doing this work on resiliency is that I wanted to find a word or like a way of describing how I was seeing resilient people were able to have these like mindsets, these attitudes, but also this like sense of this alignment between their like intuition and trusting their ability to like figure things out. And so often when we're like collecting this data and collecting this research and like learning about people, so often there's this like, we can't quite put our finger on it yet, but we know it's there. And I felt like, for example, like just calling it like, a resilient mindset was very much doing a disservice to like the emotional component to perspective. So how I finally kind of landed and had this like wee bit of a reckoning with what is it that I'm actually talking about? To me, it was this full embodiment of perspective, which means, yes, it's attitudes, it's mindset, critical thinking, problem solving, our abilities to organize and process information, 100%. And that had a role in our ability to be resilient. But the other side of it was that intuitive piece. It was like that intuition, trusting that deep knowledge, that inner knowing. So what I saw is that resilient people had both, that they were able to have this beautiful alignment or connection between their head and their heart. So they can see their way through the world, but they also were able to feel their way through the world. They were able to make, as I said before, what matters most matter most. So perspective also is something that so first of all, to circle back, that is what perspective is. It is this beautiful constellation of this mindset, feelings, ability to process how we respond. So again, it's this kind of big mashup of all those things, and I chose to call it perspective, heart perspective, mind perspective, that we again know how to make what matters most. So once I landed on perspective, then I got really curious about what do we know about this? And one of the first ideas I came upon is that our perspective grows in relation to our lived experience. The more we experience, the more we see, the more we do, the more we fail, the more we, kind of go off course, the deeper our understanding is of not only the world, but also like us in the world and also like the human condition. And I also saw that with the more perspective we had, again, that's in relation to the lived experience. So the more experience you have, the broader your perspective becomes. I also saw this like beautiful capacity for like understanding people in a different way. So I would see things like compassion increase, including compassion for oneself. I would see higher abilities for empathy and perspective taking, which is a really big deal. Being able to see something from somebody else's point of view, that's like a radical skill to be able to take a moment, step back, look at something from that like 30,000 foot view and be like, okay, I get this. Or with the knowledge that I have to the best of my ability, I maybe can see why or imagine why they're behaving this way or they're acting this way. Like perspective taking is it's pretty remarkable. The other thing that I noticed is how much almost like relief people experienced when they had like a perspective shift. That like all of a sudden they saw the world with this new information. And more often than not, I saw it bring relief. It added just this sense of ease, or just at least this knowing that maybe you're not alone, or knowing, you know what, maybe it's not a you problem, it's maybe more a them problem. Like whatever that learning shift was, allowed people to again show up in the hard parts. Like we're able to, give second chances even, or practice forgiveness. Like again, it was just really powerful, that alignment between head and heart. And what I also happen to see is that when the variables, head and heart, were out of alignment, that's what brought people so much distress. So, for example, like your head could know better logically, but your heart maybe wasn't on the same page. And that delta between our head and our heart could be quite substantive. And the bigger that delta between your head and your heart, the more unrest people would feel, that people would feel really vulnerable. They would feel really out of sorts, because living in alignment is so important for our well-being. Being able to like be who you are, know who you are not, and show up within your integrity was so important for our ability to be resilient. So the question kind of comes then, like, how do we teach perspective without literally throwing people into these major life events for them to broaden their perspective? Like, can we learn perspective without essentially having to get like, going to hell in a handbasket? And I believe we can. We can build perspective by hearing other points of view and not coming from a place of like, does this agree or disagree with what I believe to be true? Just kind of more getting curious about, where do other people's ideas come from? What are their experiences like? What is, for example, there's so much within our culture or that we're normed to, that we just kind of think that this is how everybody thinks, perhaps. And again, it's just those interruptions of kind of being on autopilot so we can be open and curious. So being curious. We also know being exposed to different ideas, like through, television, through movies, through literature, like just being exposed to different types of music, different customs, different practices, all of those kind of activities will broaden our perspective. Again, being able to also have conversations with people who don't always think the same way that you do. And I know I kind of sometimes rock the boat a wee bit, because I made a comment once on a podcast a little while ago that said, I want Democrats to have friends who are Republicans, and I want Republicans to have friends who are Democrats, because the only way forward is to see the human in both parties, right? We have to broaden our perspective. And again, it's not this us versus them. It's this idea of this collective, this idea of understanding the humanity and being able to see one another. And again, we think that's very important. I think that is very important. Now, I'll share with you, when I was putting together the first book, Calm Within the Storm, and I was introducing the pillar of perspective. In that book, I shared one of the most beautiful examples of a perspective shift that I was ever witness to. And it just so happened to involve Ava, our middleist, the one in the middle. Now, I know middleist isn't a word, but if you have an oldest and a youngest, you absolutely have a middleist as well. So my middleist, little Ava. And this was going way back to like, gosh, like early elementary school. And I recall I was still working at the university, and Ava was participating in this event called cross country running. Now, in Ontario in the fall, the all of the children participate in cross country running. So it's not like I think in the US where people have to like train and practice and be like part of this group. Literally every kid who's able does cross country running in the fall in Ontario. And I came to her meet to watch Ava in her first cross country run. And I remember being late to that event, which was the reality. I think it's a reality for a lot of parents who are working. And I remember being late, and I got there near the kind of end of it. And I saw her there with the group. And even from the distance in which I was to her, I could tell Ava was cheesed. Like Ava was upset. And I thought, oh gosh, this today probably didn't go very well. And so I was kind of getting ready to like, how do I, let her know that like, hey, cross country isn't for everyone. They force you to participate, but don't worry about it. This isn't going to make or break your future. And I was already kind of getting ready to like support her. And I got up to her, and I finally, and she looked at me, and like that, like kind of lip started to quiver. Like I could see that she was holding tight to these big emotions. And I was like, girl, you're good. And she's like, oh, mom, I am not good. And I was like, okay. She said, today was the most humiliating day of my life. And I was like, oh my goodness. And my brain was already like imagining what had happened to her. And she's like, it was the most embarrassing day of my life. And I'm like, okay, Ava. I'm like, how do I show up for you? What do you need? And she's like, well, listen to this. Mom, I came second. And all of a sudden I paused. I was like, what? Second? I'm like, girl, there's nothing wrong with coming second. And she said to me in that moment, I still remember just the feistiness in which she delivered this line. It is the winner of losers, mother. This is a big deal. And I am so embarrassed. Okay, so clearly I don't even know where I'd gone wrong at this point to have Ava believing that second place was the winner of losers. I know our house is a wee bit competitive, but I didn't know it was that competitive. And I tried to like explain to her that, like, second is not the winner of losers. You are okay. And you know what? If it means this much to you, next year you can put in some training and you can go out there. And gosh, we're talking about like an 8, 9-year-old, right? But I'm like, we can put in some training and we can set you up if winning cross country is this important to you. And she's like, yeah, I'm going to come back next year and I'm going to win this because I'm never going to feel like this again. And of course, I was just like, wow, we got some work to do. Now, probably similar to most parents, you have these moments and then you kind of forget. You kind of forget that, oh, we have some work to do about helping Ava hold perspective about cross country running and what it means to come in second. So all of a sudden, I don't give this much thought till a calendar year later, and we're approaching our next cross country experience. And she's already like training, like she is running hills in the backyard. She is like, I am not going to lose this year because I don't like what that feels like. So that's what I remembered. Shoot, I forgot to teach my child perspective. My bad. We'll do our best. So as I was bringing her to the event that day, I was like, girl, please, like, just do your personal best. Like, I don't want you to be under pressure. This will not make or break your elementary school career. Like, I was doing my best to support her. And she's like, Mom, you don't have to worry. I have this so locked in. And I was like, okay. Now, unfortunately, again, the reality of a lot of us parents who work, I wasn't able to actually be there for her particular run, but I was able to get there close to when it was finishing up. And I saw her when I got out of the car, I walked across the parking lot. I saw her with her group and she was like beaming. Like, I mean, so joy filled. And I thought, damn, she won. And it's not that I didn't want her to have won, but I was a bit nervous about what kind of precedent this was standing, like this was setting up for her. So I just thought maybe we would just kind of like play it down a little bit. Like, obviously we weren't going to put an announcement out on the paper or on social or whatever. I was like, okay, we'll just downplay it and just maybe move on. So I got there and she looked at me and she's like, oh my gosh, Mom. She's like, this was the best day of my life. And then I was like, yeah, winning is fun. Okay, let's get ready. And she's like, no, 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 Mom, I need you to hear this. I was like, okay. She's like, this was the best day of my life. She said, Mom, I came in last place and it was amazing. Okay, let's just pause. Pardon? And this is what is just I love about parenting is like you literally think you have it figured out and then nope, not even close. And I leaned in close and I'm like, girl, did you just say you came in last? And she said, yes. I'm like, okay, I need some more information because you look really happy that you came in last place. And last year you came in second. And that was apparently pretty catastrophic. And she's like, Mom, I got to tell you what happened. She said, we had to run 2 laps of this huge field, this course. They had to run it twice. And she said, I got out there on the first lap and I literally blew everyone out of the water. She's like, I was so far ahead of all of the other runners. And I'm again just listening. And she said, I actually started to like lap the group. Okay. And she said, in the very end of the other group, so this was like the girl who was in last place. She said, as I was coming up to her and I was getting ready to lap her, she just happens to be one of my little friends from school. And she just happens to have Down syndrome. And the little girl saw Ava coming up behind her and she had a big smile on her face. And she's like, Ava, are you going to run with me? And Ava said, yes, I'm going to run with you. I'm here to run with you. And so Ava stayed with that little girl and everybody else ended up passing them. And it was just Ava and her little friend. And right when they were coming to the finish line, Ava turned to her friend and said, hey, go get this. Oh, gosh, I'm getting emotional just telling you about this. So Ava came in last. So her little friend didn't. And I remember that moment. Oh, I was just so so proud of my daughter that she was a good human. She always is a good human, and making or breaking experiences doesn't make us a good or not person. But it's just like when your kids show you, even when they're little, that they have like this character. Oh, I told Ava, like, sister, you are right. This is like coming at last is absolutely the best feeling in the world. And that was, gosh, so that was almost probably like 13 years ago. And there are still moments when I just like think about the fact that, somewhere along the line, you know, obviously we did something right, that Ava was able to have perspective in that moment. That when that little girl said, Ava, you're going to run with me, that she didn't falter, that she kind of let go of her dream of winning the race and instead ran with that little girl. And that's what, in my mind, perspective is all about. It's like we can have all these big ideas, these attitudes, these feelings, but it's like, what do you do in the moment? Like, what's your decision when you are in those kind of moments, or what we call like those kind of TSN turning points? Like, what do you do with perspective? That's what I think it's all about. And like, I just really encourage you to trust that when called upon, you're going to do the right thing. And when called upon, you are able to make what matters most matter most. And our perspective, it's not something that's like, it's not something about like, oh, we have to get it right all the time. But it's this idea of like, when you line up and when you are in alignment and you line up with your values and the way you see the world and the way you feel the world, like you are so wise. Even our children are wise to like know intuitively what is sound. Like, how do I want to be in the world and then show up? And, sometimes it's this idea of just being open to the fact that we might have our own plans, but if we can show up in situations where our character get tested and then we're able to like live in alignment, it's a pretty powerful place to operate from. So our perspective is this kind of tender but deep confidence in trusting our head and trusting our heart. And, it reminds me of, gosh, whenever I can quote Winnie the Pooh or Christopher Robin, like I'm going to, but it's just kind of this idea that we are stronger than we might know, or braver than we might ever imagine. And I think perspective is the fact that we might not see it within ourselves every day, but we trust that it's there. And our bodies hold so much wisdom and all of the lessons we've been imparted, even for our little ones. Perspective is something that we can cultivate and choose to really lean into and protect and preserve, and also be open to growth. So, my friends, that is the variable of perspective. I'm sure this will be the first of many times I cry my way through a podcast. But I tell you, when those tenderhearted moments, those precious moments, that I've been so fortunate to witness with my own family, but also the beautiful people that I get to work with. I'm a deep feeler. It's how I show up in this world. And I hope that little perspective, gave you something to think about as well. So in the meantime, please take good care of you. Thank you for joining me today. And I look forward to our paths crossing again. So see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for spending time with this podcast episode today. I hope you found something helpful in Resiliency Redefined. Please feel free to share it with somebody who you might think could benefit. Maybe there was something useful, something in particular that you think you could pay forward. Also, if you have a moment, please feel free to rate and review this podcast wherever you like to listen to your podcast. It means the world to me. And again, thanks for your time. Thank you for your interest. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.